Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edward James. I'm the Director of Content and Analysis at MEED Projects. And today it's my pleasure to be able to give you a brief overview of the projects market in the GCC, looking at the performance of the market during the difficult 2020, and then looking at 2021 and further ahead as to how the market will perform going forward. So let's start by just explaining where the data from this presentation today is coming from. There is a lot of data here. It is quite data intensive, and it's all coming from MEED Projects. MEED Projects is an online project tracking tool. We are tracking more than 15,000 active projects in the MENA region. And by tracking projects, we're able to quantify the trends and size of markets in various sectors. So all the data today is coming from meedprojects.com. So let's start by looking at the historical market for project spending in the GCC. As you can see here in this graph, there have been approximately $1.4 trillion worth of projects awarded in the 6 GCC states over the last 10 years. Reached a peak in 2015 and 2014 of about $170 billion. We then, of course, saw a decline in project spending due to lower oil prices, as governments were able to spend less money on projects due to lower revenues. And unfortunately, in 2020, we actually reached a record low of just under $64 billion, primarily as a result of the pandemic and also as a secondary cause of falling oil prices last year, as the demand for crude fell quite considerably. So we saw approximately 40% fall year on year in project awards, perhaps not very surprising given what happened last year and in line with many other industries. So it was a difficult year last year. And just let's look at the largest markets over the last decade before looking at last year's performance on a country level. We can see that the 2 largest project markets in the GCC are by some margin Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Again, no surprise, they are the 2 largest economies in the region. They have the 2 largest populations as well. But these have been the historically over the last decade the 2 most significant project markets, offering the most opportunities for companies. Nonetheless, although they are projects markets in other GCC states are considerably smaller, they are also significant project markets in their own right, between $100 and $200 billion of major projects awarded in the last decade. So let's see how each market was affected last year. So while it's true to say that 2020 saw a big fall across the GCC in projects market activity, actually on a country by country level, it wasn't quite the same picture. We can see here that Saudi Arabia and UAE, being the 2 largest markets, also saw the largest fall in projects activity. Saudi Arabia fell by more than half in terms of contract awards, which might be quite surprising for some. And the UAE also fell to about 50% of its 2019 levels. Apologies. And so both markets are still the largest projects markets in the region. Nonetheless, they have fallen quite considerably in 2020. On the other hand, Egypt, Qatar, Iraq, Oman, Algeria, Kuwait, fairly stable, flat by comparison. So when we're looking at 2020, we're not necessarily saying across the board all countries were equally affected. In fact, in some cases, some country markets actually grew last year, year on year, albeit from much lower base than the 2 largest markets of Saudi Arabia and UAE. Now let's look at that same data for the past decade and look at it by sector rather than by country. You can see here quite clearly that the largest single project sector by a significant margin is construction. So that's villas, offices, malls, hotels, schools, hospitals, universities, and so forth, with more than $500 billion worth of contracts awarded over the last 10 years or so. Next, we have transport, which is less than half of the size of the construction market, about $250 billion. That's roads, ports, airports, railways, and so forth. Then oil and gas, of course, combined over $350 billion worth of contracts in the last decade. Power, particularly in renewable energies, which have grown significantly in the last 5 years or so, nearly $150 billion. And then water, industrial and chemical, making rounding up the other sectors. And again, when we're looking at the performance in 2020 compared with 2019, actually, again, it's a different picture when you're looking at individual sectors. So while it's true, again, that the overall market fell quite considerably in 2020 on a sector level, it was a slightly different story. The largest sector, construction, was also saw the biggest fall, maybe 50%, more than $30 billion fall year on year, and a considerable decline. Likewise, gas, oil, industrial also fell a significant amount on 2019 levels. On the other hand, we can see that transport actually grew last year, likewise with power sector, and water was somewhat flat. So again, it's not necessarily the same story on a sector by sector basis, but on a country level, again, like the country levels, some sectors have been hit harder than others. Now, let's put that data into a bit more concrete projects and actually what happened on a project by project basis last year. Here is a list of some selected major projects awarded in the region over the last 12 months. You can see here a wide variety of different types of projects in different sectors, as well as in different markets. You can see all GCC states represented here. We have defense projects. We've got innovation and academic campus in Abu Dhabi. We've got wastewater schemes, solar power projects, airport schemes, real estate, and so on. So you can see that GCC, as you've seen from the previous data, is a quite diverse market across all markets and all types of sectors. Just to give you an indicator of some of the projects that are awarded last year. So how's 2021 going to perform? So while it's true that 2020 was a pretty bad year all round, what we've actually seen is a large backlog of tenders and contracts now be delayed into 2021. And this means that all those contracts which should have been awarded in the projects market in 2020 have now been shifted instead into 2021. And this has created quite a large backlog. And in terms of the value of projects out to bid, where the tender has actually been issued, where bids have been submitted in many cases, you can see that there's actually a very significant pipeline of projects. In Saudi Arabia and the UAE combined, we have nearly $80 billion worth of contracts in tender, and in many cases in under evaluation. That's more than all of the GCC states last year combined, so that's quite promising. And then across in Oman, 25 billion, Qatar, more than 22 billion, in Kuwait, $20 billion. Again, we're adding another 50, $60 billion of additional contracts. So when we add that all up, we're well over $120 billion worth of contracts to be awarded in 2021, which will be a significant uplift on last year's numbers and more like the 2018, 2019 figures. So the market, if all goes to plan and schedule, is set to rebound quite nicely this year. Of course, many things can happen and many projects do get delayed. Nonetheless, this is indicative of the likely performance over the next 12 months. And again, just to highlight what constitutes that data and some of the key projects currently out in the market, out to bid, just to give you an idea of some of those significant projects this year. Well, it's led by one of the world's largest projects, which is the LNG processing trains and additional capacity in Qatar. We've got this very major ADNOC Hail and Ghasha sour gas project, should be awarded this year as well in Abu Dhabi. We've got big power and water plants across the region. We've got the world's tallest tower, which has been out for bid for quite some time now, could potentially be awarded this year, Dubai. And we've got a range of other significant road, oil and gas, pipeline, power and water projects as well coming up in the region. So that's 2021. What about going further ahead? Well, we've seen nearly $1.5 trillion worth of projects awarded over the last 10 years, and it's very positive to say that the pipeline going forward over the next 5 to 15 years in terms of the horizon for the award of these projects is worth nearly $2.5 trillion. Again, this pipeline of projects, of announced and planned and unawarded projects, is led by Saudi Arabia at just over $1.2 trillion, of course, led by the $500 billion NEOM New City project in the far northwest of the kingdom. We then have the UAE at more than $700 billion of known projects in the pipeline, and again followed by at a distance, but still significant in their own right, by Kuwait, Qatar, and Oman at between 100 and $200 billion worth of projects in their pipeline. Of course, not all these projects will eventually be awarded. Some will be delayed, some will be cancelled. But also at the same time, it's true to say that a lot of projects will be announced and added to this to the pipeline over time. So it is, even if 50% of this pipeline proceeds and ultimately ends up getting awarded, that's still more than $1.2 trillion worth of projects over the next 10 years or so. So still a very positive outlook for the region. And finally, just taking that data, looking at it by sector, again, in keeping with the historical trend, the largest sector going forward, it will be construction at more than $1.5 trillion of known future projects, then by transport, nearly $400 billion, power at more than $150 billion, and then other sectors rounding that off. So still, again, not only on a country level, but on a sector basis, there is a large diversification and broad mix of projects going forward, which provides a lot of optimism and hope for the market going forward. And then again, just a sample of some of the major projects coming up in the longer, over the next decade or so. Of course, we've got NEOM, we've got nuclear power program in Saudi Arabia, we've got road and new projects, new airports, new residential city programs, and again, a wide mix, and across many different countries and different sectors. So again, something for everyone in the years to come. So thank you very much for your attention. It has been a difficult 12 months, unsurprisingly, for the projects market, but we expect a quick rebound this year. And again, looking forward longer term, the pipeline is still very positive. The drivers for project market activity, be they population growth, economic growth, or the need to invest in infrastructure, still exist, still driving that market forward. And so we could be hopeful for many years to come of the GCC providing a broad range and exciting range of project opportunities. My name is Edward James, Director of Content Analysis at MEED Projects. Thank you very much, and I look forward to being able to speak to you all again very soon. Thank you.